All right, welcome back to ABA exam review and the continuation of our BCBA practice exam series, where we're going through another set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please subscribe. Check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials. When you pass your exam, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. Tony receives praise for completing math problems when working with his teacher at school. At home, Tony receives extra play time. Every 10 minutes, he works on math problems with his dad. The schedule depends on whether Tony is at school or at home. What type of reinforcement schedule does this most resemble? So we have a compound reinforcement schedule question because we've got multiple schedules going on in this same schedule. First, Tony gets praise for completing math problems with his teacher at school. At home, he gets extra play time. Every 10 minutes, he works on math problems with his dad. So the behavior is the same, is working on the math problems, but the schedule availability just depends on where Tony's at. And so when we have these two schedules that are rotating or dependent on the situation, but there's also the SD because Tony knows at school it's a certain type of reinforcement schedule and at home it's different, what will we call that? A multiple schedule. Yes, the multiple schedule, we've got two or more schedules rotating or available at different times with an SD signaling availability. The mixed schedule is the other type of schedule like this, but the difference is mixed has no SD. A chain schedule is when the schedules need to be completed in a certain order to get reinforcement. Not the case here, no chaining going on. Concurrent is when you get a choice, when you have two schedules for two behaviors. Tony is not necessarily choosing, it just depends on the context. And then alternative, when we have to either complete one schedule or the other. In this case, it's just two schedules that dependent on the situation. Type of reinforcement schedule that this most resembles is a multiple. A paraprofessional at a group home that you work with as a behavior analyst tells you they are struggling to collect frequency data on all 5 adults throughout the day due to limited resources. The paraprofessional says she is worried her data may be inaccurate at times. What might you recommend to the paraprofessional given this information? Like we've talked about before, whenever we start thinking about limited resources, limited time, but we want to measure something, so they want to collect frequency data throughout the day, we need to start thinking about discontinuous measurement. In this case, if you have this paraprofessional who's struggling to collect data on 5 adults and that it's inaccurate, let's start to think of ways we can help them within the confines of what's available to them. A, you should recommend a discontinuous measurement procedure. Frequency may just not be realistic given this paraprofessional has to watch all 5 adults and just won't be able to continuously measure everything. B, you should recommend the paraprofessional seek out additional training on her own free time. She's already limited by resources. She's already limited by whatever's available to her. Asking her to seek out her own training just isn't feasible. C, you should recommend the paraprofessional work harder. That is not something you should do. That is not good collaboration. It's not being a good team member. D, you should recommend the paraprofessional use a duration measurement procedure instead. Duration is going to run into the same problem. It's continuous. We need something that's easier to use with multiple people given the limited resources. So you might recommend a discontinuous measurement procedure. Greg has 3 separate interventions that he thinks may work to increase spelling fluency for one of his 3rd graders. Greg has limited time, so he can't use a withdrawal design, but he would still like to test all 3. He decides to use a multi-element design instead. What may be a disadvantage of the multi-element design? So we have Greg, who wants to use a multi-element design, and the question wants to know, what is a disadvantage here? We have 3 separate interventions, right? So let's just say this is our fake multi-element design. We've got 3 interventions going on, rotating, right? Greg doesn't want to withdraw anything, so he's testing all 3. Now, this looks okay, but what does Greg need to be aware of? A, Greg will have to take baseline data first. Not necessarily in the multi-element design, you don't necessarily need to take baseline. It's an advantage, and some might consider it a disadvantage, but for Greg, he has limited time, no baseline needed. B, the multi-element design will be more resource and time efficient. Likely, right? If he's, instead of having to go through the whole process of adding the intervention, and then removing the intervention and adding the next one, removing the next one, which is going to take a lot of time. Greg instead can just rotate through them and get a good idea very quickly of all three. C, the data may be impacted by learning the longer the design goes on. Yes, this is an issue with multi-element designs. As we go on, the interventions are being rotated, and it's a good chance that the third graders are learning from each intervention, which is affecting the next intervention coming after the prior one. So that's something we have to be aware of when using a multi-element design, that learning is very likely taking place. A parent is trying to stop their child from picking at scabs. Each time the child moves their hand toward a scab, the parent gently blocks the hand from making contact with the skin. This eventually leads to the child no longer picking their scab. What procedure is the parent using? Very easy question. When we get an easy question, we trust our preparation, answer it, and move on. We want to identify the procedure. We know the parent is trying to stop the picking. So whenever the hand is moved towards the scab, the parent blocks the hand and doesn't allow it to make contact. So when we're blocking the behavior from happening, what do we call that? Well, we call it a response blocking. Very clear, very easy. The hardest part about response blocking is being careful to not always confuse it with response extinction. With response blocking, we're not too worried about the function. We're just trying to stop the behavior from occurring. And in some cases, that might lead to extinction. Sometimes it might not. So response blocking is not always extinction. So don't get those two confused. We don't necessarily know the function, so we can't say it's extinction. It is response blocking. C, response maintenance. Clearly, there's no response maintenance going on here. It's not a teaching question. And stimulus fading. Well, the parent is introducing the block, not fading anything out. So the procedure the parent is using would be considered response blocking. A manager at a call center notices that employees spend more time handling calls from higher paying customers, as these calls tend to result in larger commissions. Employees spend less time on calls from regular customers, which offer smaller incentives. What principle explains the employee's behavior? So we're looking at the employee's behavior. And what do we know? We know the employees are spending more time, let's say higher paying calls is more time, whereas less time on smaller incentives. So we've got less time for smaller incentives, more time for higher incentives. And that makes sense, right? Wouldn't your behavior go towards the more higher paying customers and commission? Yes, behavior tends to go where reinforcement is. What principle might explain this? A, negative reinforcement. Well, if anything, they're being positively reinforced from the commission, not negatively reinforced. Nothing is being removed as a consequence. B, matching law. Yeah, matching law might help explain this phenomenon where behavior goes to where reinforcement is. If more reinforcement is available for the higher paying customers, then behavior might tend to shift that way. Stimulus salience. This has to do with the presence of the stimulus in the environment. Not necessarily the case here since they're making phone calls, so it's not really the salience of the customers. And then automaticity. Automaticity would have to do with the employees not being aware they're being reinforced. Well, employees are choosing to go to the higher pay. They know what reinforcement they're getting, higher pay. So by doing that, they understand reinforcement's available. The principle that would best explain this would be B, matching law. Analyze the following graph. If the classroom contains 10 students, what conclusions can you draw from the data? The most difficult part about the visual analysis questions is one, understanding what the question is asking, and two, making sure you're being careful and understanding everything the graph is showing you. In this case, if the classroom contains 10 students, what conclusions can we draw? Well, first off, 10 students, and this is student 6. So we've got 10 students and we've got one graph for one student. Got to keep that in mind. 2, we're looking at number of words spelled correctly over a number of days, and it's clearly a multi-element design. We've got 3 interventions all being rotated out. Now for student 6, when are they spelling the number of words spelled correctly? When are they spelling the most number of words correctly? During Game Plus by a pretty wide margin. So these are the facts. These are what we know. What can we conclude? A, all students are going to spell more words correctly with Game Plus. Well, just because student 6 does doesn't mean all students will. We can't say because student 6 does something, we can do it for the whole class. A is out. B, only certain students will spell more words correctly with Game Plus. We also can't say that. We only have data for the one student. We can make an assumption or conclusion about this one student. C, the student is going to spell more words correctly with Game Plus. That's what we can say. This is what we know so far. We have a student who spells more words correctly with Game Plus. That's all we know. Don't try to use data to explain more than what is possible. We have one student, just one student and their data points to explain number of words spelled correctly. A token is placed in a special spot on Jeremy's work table that Jeremy can use for backup reinforcers no matter what. But if Jeremy engages in challenging behavior, the token is taken away. What does this most accurately resemble? Easy question, but it's an example of choosing the best answer. We know that Jeremy gets this token no matter what. So Jeremy can just, it's at the table, Jeremy can exchange it. So Jeremy gets it no matter what. It's non-contingent. But if he engages in challenging behavior, we take the token away, which would be a response cost. So what does this resemble? A, negative reinforcement. Response cost is a negative punishment procedure. So A is out. Now we have response cost and bonus response cost. We've got to pick the best answer, and the most precise answer, best answer, is going to be bonus response cost. That non-contingent token is the bonus that can be taken away contingent on bad behavior. Positive punishment, no. Response cost has to do with negative punishment. Good reminder with picking the most precise answer available. Read every single answer choice every time. During recess, the student repeatedly disrupts a game by not following the rules. The teacher asks the student to sit on a nearby bench and watch the game for 5 minutes, but does not allow them to participate. After the time is up, the student is allowed to rejoin the game. What type of timeout procedure is the teacher using? So there are several different variations of timeout in ABA. In this case, we have a student who's disrupting the game, so they have to go sit on a bench. They can't participate, but they are watching. What kind of timeout would we call that? A, an exclusionary timeout. With an exclusionary timeout, we're removing the kid altogether. They're not necessarily excluded. They're still there watching. They just can't participate. B, partition. Partition timeout is exactly what it sounds like. We would put up some sort of wall or screen or partition between the student and the reinforcement. C, timeout ribbon. There's no ribbon, there's no stamp, there's no sticker marking the kid as in timeout. So it has to be D, contingent observation, where the student is forced to observe contingent on his or her behavior. Thanks for watching. That wraps up this exam. We're going to start our next one soon, so be sure to follow to the next video. For all of our practice exams, go to behavioranalyststudy.com. When you pass, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.